Scott Leadingham. Thanks for joining us here in the unique Northwest. Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, Nevada, and a lot of other states are in the news for the presidential primary contest, but there are other elections to be watching, and those are elections for things like bonds and levies for schools and EMS. And those are some of the things that we will be talking about here on this episode. Thanks for joining us today, Kanale Rhoden.
Thanks for having me.
So Kanale is the producer and host for NWPB's special election year initiative called NWPB Vote 2020. So we're going to be delving into what we're going to be talking about over the next year in that vein. So Kanale, tell us real quick, broadly speaking, what is NWPB Vote 2020 going for?
Like you said, I think we spent a lot of time talking about the national conversation with national candidates and initiatives. And so what we want to do at NWPB this year is provide context to a lot of regional and local issues that seem to be on the ballot. And I think we're kind of in a time of, there's just so many things being thrown at us, and we sometimes don't fully understand issues. And when we fully don't understand something, we either hate it or like it just based on a title or what we see on social media or what people say. So what we want to do at NWPB this year is provide context to exactly what does it mean to vote for a bond or levy, and what does it mean to people's property taxes, right? Like directly impacting you, what does it mean on a day-to-day basis instead of just hearing those big words. So we want to have podcasts and live streams and website and radio segments and TV things that kind of explain the breadth of what the election is going to cover.
All right, and on that note, here's a little bit of a shameless plug, a little TV spot that we have to explain a little bit, and you'll see some voices and faces of people around the station.
2020 is an important year for our country as well as our region.
PBS and NPR have you covered for everything national. The power of two trustworthy news sources.
But NWPB will go beyond the national conversation. All year long, we'll be voting for local bonds, levies, county officials, and state representatives.
At NWPB, we want to help you make an informed decision.
Our mission for NWPB Vote 2020 coverage is to provide you with information and context to give you the confidence to make your voice heard.
Our stories will go beyond the headlines and address who we are as a community. We will address the how.
How will it affect you? How do local issues impact national conversations?
Here in the unique Northwest, you can count on Northwest Public Broadcasting
to be there every step of the way and help make your voice heard.
The thing I like about that promo, I think it shows how big of an organization and reach we have with TV and radio and digital and membership, and you're able to see the faces that are going to bring you this vote coverage. Because I think in a lot of small towns where maybe TV doesn't reach and only radio is there, I think it's good to inform them that we also have this video component to Vote 2020 that they can always look on an app or our website or Apple TV or whatever, however you get your stuff. That video is also part of Northwest Public Broadcasting. So
right. So on that note, we're in this initiative trying to drill down into kind of the local and regional issues, not just the presidential year. That's a big thing, of course. You're going to hear about that and see that a lot on the news. But we want to talk about the things that affect the Northwest. On that note, special election recently that had a lot of bonds and levies for school districts and EMS and those sorts of things. So we're not going to talk about the results right now because those are still being counted. Right. So we're going to focus though on just kind of the issues about why those are important. So on that note, part of what we were talking about is why those issues are not only important, but kind of the background of why we even have to fund public education in these ways, some levies and bonds and these sorts of things. So first though, nuts and bolts. What is the difference between a bond and a levy? Some people might not know that.
Yeah, so I sat down with Pullman Superintendent Bob Maxwell, who really put it in a very plain way. A bond is for building, and a levy is for learning at the very basics of it. So these school districts who pass bonds and levies, bond dollars will help capital projects for them, build new schools, renovate current schools that potentially they don't have funding from the state. And then levy would be to fill the gap of teacher salaries or nursing salaries, or if a school wants to start a new program at a high school, like an AP program or a video production program. For the most part, the state doesn't fund that kind of thing. and so they rely on these levy dollars to help fill that gap and provide a little more experiential learning for students in school.
So the first episode of a podcast that we're doing this year called How We Ended Up Here, and the first episode of that podcast is out now. You can find it on Apple Podcasts and on our website. There's a shameless plug. But it looked at public school funding in the state of Washington, and you talked to Bob Maxwell, the superintendent of Pullman Public Schools. And so just top line, not just finding out the difference between a bond and a levy. Okay, that's pretty elemental. But like, why do they have to fund themselves through voters on a continuing basis? Like, talk about some of the stuff that you learned that you didn't really know before about that educational funding in the state.
Yeah, so the whole podcast idea came from, I guess I'm relatively new to the area, right? I've lived in Pullman for 8 years, and before that I went to college here, but when you're in college you don't really know the area that you're in. But I grew up in Hawaii, and so there's a very completely different educational funding model in Hawaii where everything is run from the state or Department of Education. And so when I moved to Pullman and we started passing bonds for hospitals and schools, I really didn't understand like why it's a thing here. Because in Hawaii, you never increase property taxes because of bonds and levies. That wasn't a thing. So I think for me, it was really understanding why I have to vote for this in general. And I think, again, it goes back to our initiative of people potentially don't understand why these things are being asked of them. And so this year we want to kind of explain those things. But essentially, I had to go back to square one of how does Washington State fund public education. And so Bob kind of talked me through that process, and Washington State uses what they call a prototypical model. So what it would take a general size of a school district to run operationally, set a number per student based on that. So I think the number is like 1,400 students for a typical school district. As we know, most school districts across the state are much larger than that. Of course, you'll have smaller ones in rural areas, but for the most part, I think, and Bob said it as well, that number is pretty low to come up with a per student number, but that's what the state does. So they allot so many dollars per student, and then based on how many students you have in the district, with that number gives you an operational budget for the year.
Part of the concept, not just with this podcast, but with the entire Vote 2020 initiative that we're doing here, is to go beyond the headlines and what I might call the horse race coverage, which is just like, here's the person in the race, here's their opponent, here's what they said, here's who wins the race. That's just the horse race coverage, right? We want to go well beyond that. That's what public broadcasting could and should do. So from your perspective, though, why is that important? Do people really need to know the real deep stuff, or can they just need to know who's running, what they're saying, and maybe, who wins the race?
Yeah, I think those things are important, but I also think, again, it's important, especially if you're new to the area, you've been here for a long time. Our landscape has shifted in politics, right? And so I think it's our duty as Northwest Public Broadcasting and any public broadcasting entity to provide that historical context to how things have been in the past and how we have moved or become progressive in some areas and not so progressive in the other areas. And when we look at candidates, we'll look at the platforms that they're stumping on, but we're also going to take a look at historically, if they've been in Olympia for 10 years or Washington, D.C. for 20 years, what have they voted on? Because that's going to give you a really good indication of how they're going to vote moving forward, which again turns into policy that affects our everyday life.
So you're kind of the target demographic of this sort of podcast, maybe, or just initiative, is someone who hasn't been here their entire lives for 40 years. You don't know all the nuances, the background, the history, the changes demographically and politically and that sort of stuff. So if you can just imagine yourself as a viewer or a listener or a consumer of the news, not just someone who's helping to put it out, what are some of the things that you want to learn that you aren't aware of yet?
During election season, most news stations or national networks kind of paint a broad stroke around the country. So like they'll put people in buckets when it comes to voting. And so what I'd love to find out is when we talk about rural, are they really just all Republicans? Or do we kind of just paint a broad brush of, if you live in rural town, you're going to be Republican? Is that the case anymore? So things like that I really would be interested in doing. And like you said, salmon, dams, and wolves, like get the Northwest going, right? No matter what side the story is, you're always going to have a heated debate and conversation. And someone from Hawaii, I don't get that excited about salmon, dams, and wolves. So understanding the context there of why, I guess.
Right, and connecting it. Those aren't just issues that are in and of themselves,
Right.
salmon, dams, or wolves. They are very much connected to public policy and to elections and those sorts of things. So kind of making that connection.
They jump to the farming area and water, and that, that's kind of the thing on the east side of the mountain is water.
Yeah, it is kind of important.
Big thing that kind of goes in between.
If people have questions, comments, joys, concerns, snide remarks about,
just email Scott.
Just email me. Okay. On Twitter, there's a hashtag, email.
NWPB Vote 2020. Of course, on our website, nwpb.org/vote2020. We're trying to make it as simple as possible. Email address is vote2020@nwpb.org. Keep it consistent. Or you can find us on Twitter, Facebook. All the normal places.
All the normal places. Again, that's hashtag NWPB Vote 2020 or email vote2020@nwpb.org. Kanale, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
You can learn more about this initiative and all the other news that we cover at our website, nwpb.org. Thank you for joining us here in the unique Northwest.